Chapter 9 of Fing by David Walliams, narrated by me. Chapter 9, Rolled in Rabbit Droppings. So, with heavy hearts, Mr. and Mrs. Meek picked up their daughter from school. Once again, picked up, literally. They picked Myrtle up and carried her all the way home, before depositing her as gently as they possibly could on the sofa. Thump! Mr. and Mrs. Meek were trying to hide the worry that they were feeling at breaking the bad news to their daughter, but it was all dawned over their faces. "Perhaps you would like to play a game, Myrtle, my love," suggested Father. "Or do a jigsaw, or watch television." Distraction, distraction, distraction. "Cartoons!" demanded Myrtle. "Here's the remote," said Mother, handing her daughter the chocolate-stained black gadget. Myrtle scowled back at her. "You press the button for me, you lazy moo!" Mrs. Meek did what she was told, and a cartoon flickered on the television screen. Myrtle liked the violent ones the best, where animals ran into walls, fell off cliffs, or simply exploded. Her favourite cartoon series were Pigs in Peril, Thumperoo, the Thumping Kangaroo, Ants in Your Pants, Amabiliza, Tales of a Giant Amoeba, Hippopotamus Snot, Grunter the Gorilla, Monkey Wee Monkey Doo, Crush the Cockroach. With their daughter momentarily distracted by the sight of a cartoon rabbit being flattened by a steamroller, Mr. Meek nodded to his wife. This was her cue. She scurried off to the kitchen. They had a secret plan. The pair hoped that if they gave their daughter the biggest slab of chocolate cake in history, this would soften the blow of her not getting a thing. The cartoon finished, and as the theme music played, Myrtle remembered what she had forgotten. "Where's my thing?" she shouted. "Cake, cake, cake!" yelped Father. "Coming right up, Father," replied Mrs. Meek, staggering into the living room carrying a stupendous slab of cake. It was the size of a small garden shed. "There you go, Myrtle, my angel," she said as she set it down on the coffee table. "Thud! Haven't you got a bigger slice?" demanded the girl. "Sadly not," replied Mother. "It's bigger than the cake it came from." This, of course, couldn't strictly be true, but it fooled Myrtle. It looks like delicious cake, my beautiful bunnykins. Do tuck in," prompted Father. Not being a regular user of cutlery, Myrtle simply leaned forward and buried her face in the cake. It was how a hog might enjoy its dinner. Gribble, gooble, grubble. Mother and Father sighed with relief. That feeling was sadly not to last. In no time at all, the girl had polished off the giant slab of cake. She lifted her head, her face now covered in chocolate icing. "I want my thing!" she repeated, spraying her parents with chocolate cake crumbs as she spoke. Mr. and Mrs. Meek were covered from head to toe. It looked as if they had been rolled in rabbit droppings. "Ah, yes, of course, the famous Fing," began Father, before losing his nerve. "I will let your mother take it over from here." Mrs. Meek shot a look at Mr. Meek, most displeased. He was even meeker than she was. "Well, my sweet princess," she began, "your father and I found this book deep in the vaults of the library." "Listen!" growled the girl. "I want my thing, and I want it now!" Things were going from bad to worse. The cake hadn't helped at all. If anything, it gave Myrtle a sugar rush that made her even more foul-tempered than usual. "Well, you see, the lady spluttered. "Father, you take over from here." He began, a look of terror now in his eyes. "Spit it out!" bawled the girl. "My cherub, we searched and searched every book in the library to find out what a thing is." "A thing is a thing! Duh!" mocked Myrtle. "Quiet! we found only one reference to it in the whole of the library, in this dusty old book we discovered down in the secret underground vaults. Here." Father nodded to Mother, who lumbered over with ancient tome. It's called the Monsterpedia," said Mrs Meek. "Have a look, it's fascinating reading." Mother went to pass the book to her daughter, but the book actually pushed back. "I hate books! They make my brain hurt!" Myrtle exclaimed, battering the Monsterpedia away with her hand. The book slapped her back. "Thwack! Ouch!" screamed the girl. "Get that thing away from me!" Mother took hold of the book. "Let me help you, Sugar Plum Fairy." Mother flicked through the dusty old book and opened it at the right page. "This, my child, is a Fing. Have a read." "You read it!" ordered Myrtle. Mrs Meek proceeded to read aloud all of the book, placing particular emphasis on this peculiar part. "Warning! Never ever keep a Fing in your house. They're the world's worst pets." "So, my dove of love," prompted Mother, "what do you think? Surely, you don't want a Fing now?" The pair looked longingly at their daughter, their hands glued together in prayer. Chapter 10. Jungliest. "I think," began Myrtle, her tongue tracing the plate for any uneaten crumbs. "Having a Fing as a pet would be a big fat disaster." Mr. and Mrs. Meek let out a humongous sigh of relief. Their lives had been separated. "I couldn't agree more," exclaimed Mother. Father beamed. "You took the words right out of our mouths." "The creature would destroy everything," Myrtle continued. "You are so right, righter than right," cooed Mrs. Meek. "What a clever little girl you are," agreed Mr. Meek. "The car, the house, everything. It might even kill us all." "Excellent point," agreed Father. "Yes, but not to die if we could possibly avoid it," echoed Mother. "Who on earth would want a Fing as a pet?" Myrtle laughed. Her parents joined in. "Ho, ho, ho! Hee, hee, hee!" Even the Monsterpedia seemed to wobble around, chuckling silently to itself. "Me!" replied Myrtle. The laughter died. Instantly. Mr. and Mrs. Meek couldn't believe their ears. The book stopped dead still. "I want a Fing as a pet." But, began Mother. "No buts!" shouted the girl, as she bashed her parents' heads together for emphasis. "Conk! Ow! Ouch! I said I want a Fing, and I want it now!" Mr. and Mrs. Meek looked at each other, aghast. Both were so aghast, it was impossible to tell who was the most aghast, or, to give it its proper word, egolastic. You can decide for yourself by studying these two egolastic aghastly pictures. For goodness sake, don't take too long deciding. We have a story to be getting on with. Please, let's agree that they're both extremely aghast, as indeed you'd be if you'd bring a deadly animal into your house. Now all they had to do was find one. Chapter 11. Twin Beds. The big question was this: who would have to go to the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle in search of this blasted Fing? Sitting up in their twin beds, Mr. and Mrs. Meek discussed this, way into the night. Of course, both were desperate not to go, but being who they were, the argument was remarkably polite. "But you need a jolly good holiday, Father," began Mother with a smile. "You will have been working so hard at the library, you should go." No. You have always said you wanted to travel and explore the world, Mother," replied Father. "Have I? You said you wanted to go to the seaside." "For the day." "Well, this would be like much like a day out at the seaside." "In what way?" pressed Mrs. Meek. Well, that stumped Mr. Meek rather. "There might be an ice cream van," he ordered pitifully. "An ice cream van?" Mrs. Meek was incredulous. "In the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle?" There was a loud banging on the wall. "Boom! Boom! Boom!" "Keep it down there!" shouted Myrtle from the bedroom next door. "I can barely hear myself grunt." The grunt was so loud, the whole house rumbled. Needless to say, Mr. and Mrs. Meek both looked appalled. Mother suddenly had a thought and whispered to her husband, "Of course one of us is going to have to stay behind and look after our darling daughter all on their own." "I'll go," he replied, as quick as a flash. "To the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle?" "Yes, so that's settled, then. Good night." With that, he switched off the light. Tick! Mrs. Meek slept like a baby that night. He woke up every 2 hours, crying his eyes out. Chapter 12. Some light reading. At dawn the next morning, Mr. Meek set off his quest to find a Fing. He had cast aside his bookish persona, and now had turned himself into an adventurer. Well, sort of. The man had put bicycle clips over the bottom of his trousers in case he snagged one of them on the undergrowth. Poor Mrs. Meek was very tearful at the doorstep. Since the days they were married, the pair of librarian lovebirds had never spent a single night apart. "Please, please be careful, father," implored Mrs. Meek. Mr. Meek was trying to be brave, though it was not his strong suit. Don't you worry, mother. I'll be back with a Fing before you know it." "What's the absolute worst that could happen?" "You could get eaten," called Myrtle from an upstairs window. "Thank you for your contribution, my angel, sent from heaven," called father. He smiled weakly at his wife. "I will do my absolute best not to." "Promise?" she implored. "I promise." They kissed awkwardly. Their noses were always awkward. Either their noses knocked or chins bumped, or the glasses crunched. Today their foreheads clunked together. Clunk! Ouch! Ah! Sorry. Mr. Meek picked up his suitcase, took a deep breath, and walked down the path. "I miss you already!" called out Mr. Meek. "Yuckity yuck yuck yuck!" came the cry from upstairs. Mrs. Meek blew a kiss back to his husband, which, fumbling, she caught. "Move the bottom!" shouted Myrtle. Father picked up the pace, and with his suitcase in hand, began walking to the bus stop. In his socks and sandals, shirt, tie, slacks, and tweed blazer, he looked nothing like a jungle explorer. Having never left his local town before, he was woefully unprepared. The only food he brought was a packed lunch that Mother made for him. It consisted of a bread sandwich. Father didn't like the fillings, as they were distracting. A packet of flavourless crisps. "No flavours, please. Thank you kindly." A plain yogurt, just as he liked them. As is often the way with packed lunches, Father scoffed the lot within 5 minutes of setting from home. Sitting on the bus to the airport, soon after he became cataclysmically hungry, and restored to eating the plastic box in which his lunch had been packed in. He ended up rather liking the taste, as there were none. In his suitcase, Mr. Meek had packed an anorak in case of rain, and a spare pairs of underpants and socks. He also bought some light reading, a small selection of his favourite books from home. A history of cauliflower boring buildings of Britain ponds, a closer look at gravel, tissues around the world, 101 poems about leaves, a spotter's guide to sandals, church pews through the ages, a million times table, light bulbs, and more light bulbs. Plus, he'd taken out of the library the book that had led him on the quest, the Monsterpedia. It was wriggling around in his suitcase. He just had to remember to return it within 2 weeks, or there'd be a hefty fine to pay. Of course, Mr. Meek had some room for the most important items of all, the special Fing capturing equipment. First, a rusty old hamster's cage that he'd found up in the loft, into which he put the Fing. Second, a giant tin of the Fing's favourite food, custard cream biscuits. These were to lay a trail to tempt the Fing into the hamster's cage, as soon as he'd spotted one. Mr. Meek's plan really was that simple. How could it possibly go wrong? Part 3. Deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle. Chapter 13. Underpants and Socks. Mr. Meek's journey to the deepest, darky, jungliest jungle was long. When I say long, I mean long. It involved a plane, a train, a ship, roller skates, a toboggan, a donkey, a canoe, a camel, a bicycle, a hand glider, another donkey, a hot air balloon, a rather peeved because emos do not like to be written at all. Do not try it, it will only end in tears. Yours, not the emus. Emu. After a month, he really should have packed more underpants and socks, as they were only being changed weekly. Father looked at state. His glasses had cracked, he had grown a long, staggly beard, his clothes were torn into rags, and horror upon horror, he'd lost one of his sandals. Said sandal had been devoured by an emu. Worst of all, the Monsterpedia book was now overdue, and there was already a suspension fine of 10 pence to pay. However, none of that really mattered, as Mr. Meek had finally reached his destination, the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle. Home of the Fing! In case you were wondering where the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle is, it might be suspecting I simply made it up. How dare you? Please pursue the map over the page. Start of jungle, jungle, jungly jungle, very jungly jungle, extremely jungly jungle, extremely jungly jungle. The deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle, home of the Fing. More jungle, not so jungly, less jungly, less jungly jungle, yet more jungle, hardly jungle at all, definitely not jungle, end of jungle. Now that he was in the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle, Mr. Meek had to find a Fing. The problem was, he couldn't spot one anywhere. Chapter 14. Up a tree. So Mr. Meek climbed up the tallest tree he could find, holding on tight to the Monsterpedia, which was trying to squirm out of his hand. He spotted a number of creatures from the pages of the book. There was the one-winged bird. It is a one-winged or uni-winged bird, which is unsurprisingly flightless. It leaps confidently off branches and trees before plummeting to the ground. Splat, splat, splat. A honktophonos. This is a distant relation of the hippopotamus, but the honkopotamus is legless, not drunk, it has no leg. As a consequence, the honktophonos moves around by honking, the force of wind being pushed. Out of the back blowhole is so powerful it works like a jet engine. Despite the size and weight of the honktophonos, has been known to reach speeds over 100 miles per hour. Whoosh! The mingo, a miniature mungo. The mungo, a giant mingo. The pludge, this is a venomous giant worm, half red, half white. A pludge is too large for the holes in which it burrows and ends up getting stuck. Hence one half gets sunburned and turns red, while the other stays underground and remains white. Sizzle! The flattened humming bung bung. This hairless rodent hums tunelessly all day and night. Pum, 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 pum. The humming is so wretched it makes the ears of any listeners bleed. As a result, the bung bung often finds itself being sat on top of bigger creatures, desperate to make it stop. Squish! A purple fint. This is a species of elephant that hangs upside down from branches by its trunk. It stays there for so long that it turns purple. If you're walking under one where it turns purple, beware. That means it's going to drop to the ground and flatten you in a second. Doof! A lewd, not to be confused with a lewd. A lewd is a lime green lizard, so terrifyingly looking that it is scared of itself. If it sees its own reflection in the water, it desperately swims away, sometimes for hundreds of miles. Ha! A lewd, not to be confused with a lewd. This is a hairless white ape. This is so embarrassed about being naked that it crosses his legs and hops around everywhere. Skip, hop. Also known as the nude lewd, or the hopping lewd, or the nude hopping lewd. One was spotted shoplifting dresses from women's wear boutique, causing the old dear behind the counter to faint. Doink. However, despite Mr. Meek being able to see for miles around the top of the tree, there was absolutely no sign of a Fing anywhere. The wind blew across the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle, and his thoughts turned to his darling daughter. As a father, he couldn't let Myrtle down. He had to find a Fing. Whatever it took. If not, there would be tears. Most likely, his, not hers. He thought about home. While the sun was setting across the jungle, Mr. Meek pictured Mrs. Meek putting Myrtle to bed. Right about now, his wife would be reading their daughter a bedtime story before being clonked on the head with a book and fleeing from the girl's bedroom screaming. Ah! A tear rolled down father's cheek. It was a beautiful scene. Myrtle, he said, I won't let you down. Now lost in thought, he lost in his footing. It was hard gripping onto a tree with just the one sandal. As a result, he slid down the trunk at a speed, his bottom hitting every inch of every branch as he descended. Doink oof, donk oof, doink oof, donk oof, donk oof, doink oof, doink oof, donk oof, before he hit the ground with a thud. Oof! Suddenly, Mr. Meek remembered that he had lost his book on his when he fell. The Monsterpedia! He exclaimed. Right on cue, the mighty tome whacked him in the head. Clonk! It knocked him out cold. Chapter 15. Trap. Father woke up as the Monsterpedia bonked him on the head. Bonk! Huh? Bonk! Huh? Bonk! Huh? Mr. Meek grabbed hold of the book, unsure where to put it. He stuffed it down the back of his trousers. Needless to say, the book didn't like that one bit, tried to squirm out. Stop! Ordered Mr. Meek, giving it a light slap. Anyone who was there might have thought it was a man who was slapping his own bottom. Fortunately for Mr. Meek, he was all alone in the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle. At once the man began making a plan. If he was going to catch a Fing, he would have to set a trap. So Mr. Meek found a clearing in the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle, not much bigger than a paddling pool. First, he opened his rather battered suitcase. He took out the tin of crusted creams. It was heavy, as it contained 100 biscuits. He set the tin down next to his feet. Then he took out the hamster's cage and put it on the jungle floor. As quietly as he could, he opened the little door of the cage. Creak! The plan was to lay on a trail of custard creams. The last one actually inside the cage. All the man would have to do was wait until the Fing followed the trail of biscuits. Then as soon as it was nibbling the final one inside the cage, Father would slam the door and bingo! Or, as we in the jungle, we could say, bongo! The Fing would be trapped. Rustle, rustle, rustle. A sound came from the bushes. Is anyone there? Called out Mr. Meek. There was no reply. Not that a wild animal, or indeed any animal, was likely to call back. Yes, I am here. Woohoo! Hello? The silence that followed put the man's mind at rest. Probably just another gust of wind, he muttered to himself. Of course, Mr. Meek had exercised incredible restraint in not gobbling down all the custard creams himself. It'd been a month since he set off home with only a small packed lunch. At one point, he'd become so ravenous that he resorted to eating a pair of his own underpants. Dirty ones at that. Needless to say, they didn't taste very good. Savoury rather than sweet. Whatever you do in life, do not try to eat your own underwear. Even smothered in tomato ketchup, it will taste bad. father knew he couldn't fail his daughter. There would be hell to pay if he didn't return home with a Fing. Goodness knows what hideous humiliation he would devise for him this time. Previously, when Mr. Meek had displeased his daughter, she had made father sit on a naughty step outside in the snow until his bum went completely numb with cold, sent him to bed before he even got up, buried all his clothes in the garden so he had to go to work in the library wearing only his vest and pants, buried his mother in the flower bed, forced father to eat cold cabbage for breakfast, lunch and dinner, told him to stand in a corner on one leg balancing a plant pot on his head for a year, set him to work scrubbing the house from top to bottom armed only with his toothbrush, then made him clean his teeth with that toothbrush, made him sleep in the shed, ordered him to drink from a puddle. When father turned back to open the biscuit tin, he was horrified to find the lid was already off and it was completely empty. "No!" he cried. "This was a disaster! Someone or something has eaten all the custard creams!" I know what you were thinking, but no, it wasn't me. That's the end of these chapters, folks. If you enjoyed, please do not forget to like and subscribe. And comment down below which book I should read after this one. See you guys in the next chapters. Bye-bye.